think you see we assembled quite a diverse group of speakers that have got different solutions to the decarbonisation issue. It's something that we have to do. We've set our net zero targets ahead of the government's, so it's something that we have to address rather quickly. So now's your chance to ask a few questions. Floor is yours. Paul.
My name's Paul Hatley. I'm from the Lagoon Hull project, and my question's really was directed at Sean. Really quite fascinated by your introduction. When we looked at the lagoon at Hull, one of the things we noted was the tidal range that we have here in Hull, compared it with some of the projects, particularly on the west coast. Looked at some of the economic challenges, particularly around Swansea. Your items on the way turbine efficiency has changed, must have changed the economics of how that whole project comes together. Could you perhaps say a little bit to us about the challenges that were faced at Swansea and how you might see the technology working maybe on the Humber where it couldn't be made to work on the Severn?
I think it's obviously difficult to comment in too much detail on other projects which are still continuing in some forms. But I think that there's always an array of challenges that these types of projects face. A lot of it can be down to trying to achieve too many complex objectives with a single project rather than focusing on specifically energy generation, looking at things like placemaking or ways in which you can use projects to improve local areas. These are all very good things, but if you drive your objectives too far towards some of these other benefits, it can mean that you end up with a project which is maybe too expensive than it would have been otherwise. I think there are a lot of improvements in the way in which these schemes can also be built, using novel ways of building caissons, having sort of off-site construction and fabrication, and towing them to your project is a way in which you can reduce timescales and also reduce costs. Things which I know they weren't proposing, for the Swansea Bay scheme. So, there are lots of different ways in which you can improve the viability of these projects. Largely, it's driven by tidal range. It's also driven by water depth. The amount of energy you can get is proportional to the tidal range squared, because it's the head difference as well as the flow rate, which is a function of the tidal range. So the bigger your tidal range, the more energy you can get. But it's also down to the location in which you're building these projects. I mean, in the Liverpool City region, for example, we're looking at we've got a very heavy intensive industry in Liverpool. We've got lots of power users which require vast amounts of renewable energy. It's a very good location for a technology like this, where you can provide something which is predictable. There's things like the flexibility of generation, which these machines can now bring you, where you can hold off your generation by an hour, or you can bring it forward by an hour. And it doesn't really affect your overall electricity generation to a very high extent. So things like that provide stability to the grid. They provide levels of short-term storage and dispatchability. So you start to look at all of these other benefits which the same technology can bring, and it does affect your overall viability. Things like combining it with hydrogen production, for example, can really affect the way in which these things are brought forward. So having a more holistic approach to developing projects of this nature, seeing them as part of a series of technologies is always a good way forward.
Any more questions?
Hi, Neil Durno from ABP Power Grids. Given the sort of chicken and egg scenario around shorter ship connection and ships coming in ready to be connected to a shore-based power supply, who's going to start the ball rolling in terms of investing in port infrastructure versus investing in boat infrastructure?
Probably to me, huh? I take this you. Everybody can just start throwing the ball in the game. Obviously, of course, shore-based facilities like terminal operators who have both assets, ships and shore, right? They are, of course, towards a perfect business case, much better than someone cruise vessel, right? It's just guesting a spot at a port. So it's just everybody can just start doing it. Yeah?
Excellent. Good news. Really simple.
I think Sean, good point just now. Sometimes business cases in isolation just don't stack up. If you can see it holistically, like you just suggested, you do start to see a much more joined up thinking, circular economy, a way of looking at it. It can be made to work. We are seeing even in the UK now, people starting to take much more of an interest. I think it's starting to happen.
I think it's a really good question. And I think you're absolutely right, Nook, that we should be able to just throw the ball in the game, but it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. There needs to be entrepreneurial, visionary, government, regional support to get the ball rolling. There needs to be somebody who's prepared to go, I think this is something that's good. Now, everybody has told me that putting wind on ships is an absolute no-brainer, but there are so many market obstacles that it can't be done. Right now, it can't be done. It needs an entrepreneurial, visionary state or investors to get it done. So I think it needs to be a little bit more thought through than just accepting that we can just do it. We can do it, but we need the cash to do so.
Can I add more? I mean, we have to segment the when you look at shorter ship systems, you need to segment by vessels. So a cruise industry doesn't have good benefits. So, but now the city is saying, okay, we give you some funds and you're gonna invest it, and which we invest and you install it. Is there a good business case? Yes or no? For whom? You know, I mean, it's always these questions. For whom? It is a case. Ferry industry. I mean, there you have terminal operators who own assets, both vessels and the shore side. Great business cases. Environmental, always good. You know, when you talk about shorter ship, environmental case is always given. It's great. But economically, it's there where you have a long stays of ships in port, right?
I think in the example in Antwerp, probably have shown that entrepreneurial spirit. Of course, we've had to prioritise exactly where we start and the types of vessels that we've aimed towards, but we've done that in engagement with our customers. But the point that you made about actually having an entrepreneurial and having government support, I think that's probably a key point to take away from this whole presentation. All of the examples that have been given by the panel are international examples. There wasn't one example there of an innovative British port making, putting solar panels on a shed is a start, or buying an electric car is great. But actually some of these major schemes, all of these are international examples. Certainly the Port of Antwerp, we're owned by the city of Antwerp. We're not owned by pension funds or by private equity funds. Therefore, we can have a much longer term strategic view on major innovative and changes. That's very difficult when your owner has got a 5-year lifespan within that business.
Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Stu Barnes, I'm with the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, and I just wanted to pick up on this theme of, I guess, the question of intervention and the importance of. And I've spent some time in Ostend with Rebo, and they've explained part public ownership and a kind of government view to strategically focus different ports in Belgium on different industries, Ostend being renewables. Here in the UK, as we've said, our ports are largely in private ownership, or not entirely. And again, a question, I guess, to yourself, Sean. City region and working under a devolved set of powers to Metro Mayors. You presumably worked under the previous system, and it'd be interesting to understand the difference and the advantages as you see it, having those devolved powers the ability for those interventionist kind of long-term investment decisions taken regionally.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think there are clear differences between developing projects largely driven by the private sector and in our case devolved public spending, and I think a real benefit that we have is the early stage development of these projects is always the most difficult. You talk to any other tidal range developer trying to get hold of the early funding to start doing their, options appraisal or their strategic outline business cases before you can have your DCO or, whatever planning permission you need in your hand is very difficult. The risk is high. You've got private investors which are happy to come in, but they're looking at, obviously quite high rates of return. So being in a position where a project like this, can be developed publicly is very beneficial. It means that we can do the work at the right level of robustness to be able to understand what the various configurations could look like, what the potential benefits of the project could be, investigating aspects of the project which if you were a private developer, you probably wouldn't focus on as much because you're more interested in the economics. So maybe you wouldn't spend as much time looking at what some of the wider economic benefits could be, what the impacts could be on the supply chain, what some of the environmental, impacts or mitigations could be, because, you're more interested in developing the project as quickly and, as effectively as possible with as little investment. So it's a model we're in the process of using, but so far it has been working quite effectively, and hopefully that continues.
That's I think really this is a lot of top down, isn't it? Sort of regulate the IMO regulations that are going to enforce initiatives, I think, also from government. So it is about if not when, isn't it? It's got to be done. I think there has to be support, I think, from government, I think, to develop new initiatives. And I know you are. I think what's helped in the maritime industry particularly is Maritime 2050. That's enabled all the port regions of the UK to and business as well to feed into that initiative. Certainly helped us as the Humber because we weren't particularly part of that London Westminster Maritime group, but we are now, and that's a conversation and every meeting that we have. And last week we were in Maritime UK Regional Council, which is held in Falmouth. 10-hour drive there, 9.5-hour drive back, but it was a good meeting. And then the question is asked, how do we do this? As vessel operators, ports, and the supply chain. So there's a lot to do. And I know you're on the Clean Maritime Council, which came out of the Maritime 2050. Perhaps you can tell a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the IMO has made a commitment, April 2018, made a commitment to reduce emissions from the global fleet by 50% by 2050. And that is absolutely brilliant, really helpful, because it sets the intention. But what it doesn't do is give us any near-term targets. And so the impact of that is that we kick the can down the road. And I think what we need to recognise in the UK is that international shipping is a global business and it needs to decarbonise in a commercially viable way and a technically viable way. And it's a really big political challenge. So our thinking, my group's thinking, is why don't we think about it as a commercial challenge in the way that we would think about, I don't know, winning a world championship in Formula One or whatever, and look at the business opportunities. And they're huge. They're absolutely huge. So rather than waiting for the IMO and I'm not criticising the IMO, it's a very, very complex process to get every country in the world to agree something. Very difficult. But we have to decarbonise. We all know we have to decarbonise. We shouldn't be waiting to be able to do it. So what we're looking at is where can we work with existing industries like offshore wind, like port authorities, to understand how we can exploit that technology and that capability that we have in the UK. That's exactly what we're trying to develop through the Clean Maritime Plan, which is part of Maritime 2050. Where are the opportunities? And the opportunities for wind, for direct wind in shipping, were calculated as something like £2.1 billion potential revenue generation. And so there's a whole supply chain that we can create, a whole new business sector that nobody else is thinking about, because everyone else is thinking about waiting for the regulations to tell them what to do.
Any more questions? We've got about 5 minutes left.
It seems to me the big thing for this is getting the boats carbon neutral. We're trying to have this stuff also. And one of the issues that interests me is getting places like Hull and Rotterdam, Zeebrugge, Dover and Calais working together. Why shouldn't those two authorities say, right, we're going to decarbonize those routes, specialist routes, as a start? If you got that going and it works, then you start something going somewhere else. But if we wait the international agreement, I do entirely agree, but we still have some form of connection with the rest of Europe, and we don't want to lose it in this sort of area.
Chris, there is a which I think Antwerp is the World Ports Climate Action Programme. So likes of Rotterdam and Antwerp are all working together on this. Unfortunately, not the Humber.
Are they all working with the English port?
Maybe you can answer that. I don't think so.
That's the problem.
No problem. Yeah. So
And the vessels need to be decarbonised as well.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
And that's where it, we're dependent on individual ship owners with no incentive or target to decarbonise, and there is no incentive for them to.
That's exactly where government has to be.
Exactly that.
I mean, Stuart spoke earlier, but there are some projects on the go with the offshore wind energy catapult. I think Carbon Trust, Stuart, aren't they, around hybrid vessels.
But why wait to be invited to join a club? Why not create a club?
Can I write that down? It's a great scrap.
This is the frustration. It's kind of sit back and wait and watch and who's going to do what. And actually, when you look at the economics, there's really decent business models to be done. And so it's just around getting people with the investment appetite and foresight to actually get on with this stuff.
Well, I feel there is now with the Maritime Council and spending more out to the region. It's more engaging. It does need to be supported. Look, I mentioned some projects that Stuart's on, particularly around crew transfer vessels, where there's alternative propulsion systems being investigated. Some of our companies are looking at that, hybrid vessels. But it needs to be much bigger than that, really. And I think whereas we're talking about small workboats there, really we need to be addressing the bigger tankers and cruise ships and the like that are certainly coming to this part of the world and Liverpool.
But next year's event, let's go down to the dock and see what's happening and show us a real project. Let's have some aspiration and actually get something done and show people what it's about.
Well, sorry, from this part of the way, I think there are some, and Liverpool is saying, we wanted to start the sort of smart ports group, I think, to have the conversation, because really at the moment it seems that you have to travel to Rotterdam or Hamburg or somewhere to have a discussion like this. We did so at the Shipping Week in London just a few weeks ago, but it needs to be more localised. So there's a lot going. There'll be plenty of action in that direction. It's in Chris's local economic strategy, industrial strategy, should I say? So it's which is now gone in, Chris, I think, hasn't it? Insulated government. So yeah, we've got a plan. We just need to go on and do it now. Any more questions before we close up? One at the back.
Hello, Victor Selman from Siemens. Just looking at the bigger picture, we have HS2, which is going to say 30 minutes going from Birmingham to London. If we had an east-west rail link that would take us from 13 hours, I suspect I've heard, between Hull Hull and Liverpool. And east-west link that would take it down to perhaps 2 or 3 hours. So I'd be interested in what panel's views to would that help some of the picture and the concerns that we've got.
London International Shipping Week, we had a joint session with the Mersey, and Jenny was there, and we had a whole hour on that. So I don't think we quite get to your answer that within a few minutes, but certainly we talked to the Minister about it as well. It's the port operators, PL and ABP. Everybody's really super keen to get something done. But Chris is working on this, and I know you have to go from the Humber down to Nuneaton, because I think to go back up again, you have to go around the houses. But you're right. I think that's more important to us than HS2 in many ways, or even the other one, the North-South London one, which is 30 billion. Don't get me going on that one. Crossrail, the other Crossrail, 30 billion. But yeah, so I think to answer, I can't answer your question in short, but I think there's a lot of momentum being gathered on that. And I think what we said from our session, and I'm addressing Lord Haskins, chair of the Humber, that we need champions on that, very senior champions to push that forward. I know you've been working on that, but I think everybody in either cities in between city regions like Leeds and Manchester are very much part of that. Thank you very much for attending. Can we just give a round of applause to speakers?